Hello curious people, how are you? My name is Vinicius Maluly, I'm a PhD student in geography, and welcome to another video from GeoCurioso. Today's topic is a subject that has come up a lot in recent days, and is very much in force, which is the war in Ukraine. Before we start, I have two comments to make. The first is that the channel is clearly against the war in humanitarian terms, first of all. The second is that we are going to try to bring up a subject that is less obvious, but that it is necessary to understand the geographic, historic and geopolitical context of the issue. This was requested from our subscribers. So, today's video is to discuss the case of this war. In the current moment, as we are recording this video, Russia is in the capital of Kiev. So before they had the debate on the eastern part of Ukraine in the Donbass region, they simply invaded Ukraine. All over north, south, east and west, and so, you curious one, that you're seeing this in the future, maybe you have other things to add for sure. But the moment that is being recorded is the presence of the Russians in Kiev, but it is easy to answer this question: what is the geography in all of this? We see on the news, on maps, see where land, sea, air and even cyber attacks are coming from. So there is a question of broad and strong geographic space, extending even with this virtual world, but for today's video it's something a little provocative, which explains the conflict to a certain extent, but it's a little less obvious today and it's the moment we're living in, it's the Crimea issue, and that's what we're going to want to highlight in today's video. Crimea is a peninsula and is in the south of Ukraine. A peninsula is an extension of land that is sharply, let's say, into the water. So it is surrounded by water on almost all sides. If it were on all sides it would be an island, but in this case here then, it is a peninsula. Was in the south of Ukraine, and why talk about it, right? What is the importance of Crimea, not only for the current war but in historical terms? That's what we'll also address. Crimea faces the meeting of two worlds, the east and the west. Well, what is on the other side of Crimea and what is this meeting of two worlds? It is the city of Istanbul, the most important city in Turkey, and in the former Ottoman Empire. Why is Istanbul so important? Because Istanbul is considered the meeting and has always been considered the meeting of two worlds. Istanbul was the economic, political, cultural passage between what we can understand as Asia and what we can understand as Europe. Istanbul has always had this importance of geopolitics. But we can also put strategic gel. The question of location, Istanbul has always been extremely strategic in terms of location. Ancient Istanbul, Constantinople, because of Emperor Constantine, who was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, it is cut, nowadays Istanbul, by the Bosphorus Strait. So if we look at a city divided in two, and a strait is nothing more than a body of water, in this case quite extensive, but it can be smaller, which cuts narrowly, the name explains it all, a portion of land. The key to all this, okay, there are 1,000 straits, in Brazil there are 1,000 straits, and all over the world. But what is the importance of this specific strait? It connected the Black Sea, which it still does today, and the Mediterranean Sea. The Black Sea was the meeting point between Russia and the Slavic peoples with Istanbul, and from Istanbul it went to the Mediterranean Sea. The Mediterranean Sea was the access to Europe and North Africa and continuing the access to the Atlantic. So you can see that there is an extremely important passage for the Russians. The Bosphorus Strait was then elementary in economic, political and, as I said, cultural terms. But without going too far on the issue, the important thing here is that we are going to bring two dates, because one of the meanings of the channel is to understand that geography does not happen without history. So it has two extremely relevant dates. There are two conflicts, the most recent 2014 in Crimea involving Russia, but also the War of 1853, which lasts from 53 to 1856, and not only involved Russia. It involved Russia, the Ottoman Empire, France, England, and had a conjuncture that, at the time, could be considered a multi-world part because it was encountering these two worlds, and that was all summarized in a small peninsula. It was precisely this meeting of the two worlds that led to this war in the 19th century, mid-19th century, which Russia, for reasons of Orthodox Christians, took over, or tried to take over, Crimea. What was the Russian domain of Crimea? They wanted to dominate it in order to have access to the Mediterranean Sea. Only this also lost the established trade with England and France, for example with the Indies. So we have to think that it was in the 19th century that naval connection was extremely important. It is until today. So the Russian presence there would prevent or make this access difficult. Then the Russians invade Crimea, it is for religious reasons or religious pretensions, then England and France, and it is interesting to think that England enters this conflict, because England, precisely, considers itself quite apart in these continental issues, but it enters the conflict in full force. The conflict then extends, but the Russians are then repulsed, and the economic status quo of the region remains. Recently, in 2014, Crimea was allegedly annexed by Vladimir Putin's Russia, after the expulsion of the Ukrainian president who was pro-Russia and due to a series of protests, known as Euromaidan, then one of Russia's responses. It's just going back to the Crimea. So we are talking about a difference of more than 150 years, and it still has this power, this geostrategic potency. Furthermore, it is important to think that not only for the question of location, there was between Putin's Russia and Erdogan's Turkey a connection, a very important gas pipeline called the Turk Stream, which passes through the Black Sea, and that if Crimea were dominated by a country that is not pro-Russian, this would however hinder one of the biggest exports, which the Russian economy is based on, which is natural gas or oil. Then having dominion over the Black Sea again, was Russia's connection with the West in economic terms. So we can see that history repeats itself. History, 150 years is not that long. Sometimes we think it's something very long, but in fact, it's part of the same movement. And that depends a lot on those who head the nations, but also on those geographical structures that govern relationships. So, Eastern Ukraine, as an example, is currently, as I said, in the process of decimation, and conflict is rich in iron ore. We have to take these things into consideration when talking about something geopolitical. It comes from the heads of the representatives of the nations, the interests of culture, but there is always an economic issue that can then give this strength. So currently the war between Ukraine and Russia is taking place in all parts of the country, but we have to stick to the issue that Crimea is a focal point, where the naval base is and where a strong Russian presence, inside Ukraine, is in Crimea. We hope to have collaborated at least with your reflections, with this issue that is very important now is being treated a little more peripherally, but that will certainly come to the fore in the near future. And the bibliographic reference of today's video, it couldn't help but be the book The Geography That Serves in the First Place to Make a War, by Yves LACOSTE, published and republished in Brazil since '85, by the publisher Papyrus, and which at the time was a scandal. It even took almost 10 years to be published in Brazil. The book was being smuggled in Brazil at the time, and was launched by the young Yves LACOSTE as a way of giving a critical sense to geography. Geography had a more relevant role. It is beyond a septic science, a neutral science, which at the time was still an idea that was in force. Well, curious one, you stayed until the end. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave in the comments what you think of this relationship between geography, history, politics, culture, a small piece of the territory that is this peninsula. Thank you for watching.